Yeah. Good evening, everyone. So good evening, the ones who are following us, joining us from Zoom as well. Guys, I'm sorry for you that you missed delicious Turkish food over here, but next time, hopefully you will be able to join us for the foods. And I hope you all enjoy over here with this delicious foods. Great. And always encouraged to get the second and third plate. Okay, not one plate is not enough. So tonight we are I'm very excited. I'm sure that you are as well, to have Dr. Aaron Simmons over here with his great book that he recently published, that he will make a presentation. And I asked him about the camping with writing a book during camping for over 6 months, right, Aaron? And just on top of the mountains. I said, this is very interesting because being secluded and just retreat yourself, go to the mountain, contemplate, be very in peaceful, serene environment to write a book sounds to me very interesting because I never heard about it, first of all. This is the first time. I'm sure that other people did it, right? But I never heard someone really with that intention withdrew from the life, went on top of the mountains for months and wrote a book. I heard in Turkey there was scholars who were exiled by the government because of that one he wrote the books on the mountain. Yeah, but not voluntarily, someone really did it. So therefore, when I heard about it, I said, look, Aaron, this is crazy, but it's wonderful. I want to read it. I want to reflect on it. And after I start to read it, I bought one and start to read it. It's very interesting. He put a lot of personal, in fact, memories, stories with his wife, with his children, with his parents. That's a great personal connection. And also a lot of philosophers from his life, from his professional life, part of the book. So I took a lot of notes on my edition, and I don't want to challenge him tonight, but I'm sure that I love to have conversations around different perspectives. So I'm very excited. I want to thank him and thank you all for being here. I really love to hear overall the story behind of this, and again, your perspective, even though read the book, but to hear from you much more in details will be so great. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you everyone from the Zoom as well to join us now. Without further delay, I want to invite Dr. Aaron Simmons to here. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay. Thank you all for being here. I told the folks online that you all got to participate in this awesome table fellowship and had dinner together. They are the only ones that are going to be able to see my fancy pictures because we could not get the projector to work. And so I apologize to everybody in the room. Hopefully my voice will be compelling enough, but I hear it all the time and don't think it's that exciting, but we'll do our best. So as Akif said, this book was a departure for me, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit tonight. I am a professional philosopher. I have written a lot of professional philosophy, and this book is not professional philosophy. It is philosophy inviting all of us to think about how to live and why it matters. So what I thought I'd do tonight is basically, the idea was I was going to take you to the mountains with me and basically work you through the preface and the postscript. So you get the bookends of the book, which more or less lays out the argument, what I'm trying to do and why I think it matters. There is a lot of really cool pictures that they're going to see of me falling off mountains on mountain bikes, of mine crashing, and pictures of my son. But imagine just a really awesome, handsome 14-year-old and a bunch of 46-year-olds going off their bikes, and you get the gist of it. So let's dive in, and then we'll talk afterwards. So the basic idea that I want to suggest is that, like, if you think like an epigraph, right? So the epigraph of a book is sort of the idea that anchors everything that follows. The epigraph to this book that I wanted to use, I was not allowed to, copyright reasons. Turns out song lyrics cannot be used as epigraphs, I discovered from attorneys. But if I had been able to, it simply would have said, "Ain't no next year." And this is from a song by Donovan Woods, who tells the story about his son coming to him and saying, Dad, I can't wait till next year. I can't wait till next year. And the dad says, what do you mean? Why are you excited about next year? And he said, because that's when we're going fishing and camping and going to the ball game. Because you keep telling me we'll do it next year. And then over the course of the song, Donovan Woods basically says, shoot, there ain't no next year, right? Unless we're doing it now, unless we're making it happen now, it turns out we're just deciding it doesn't matter. So there ain't no next year. Yeah. So this is the preface. Join me by the campfire. There's something different about the shadows that a campfire casts. Unlike the shadows on the sidewalk during the midst of day, campfire shadows don't stay still. They dance unpredictably. They are alive. As I sit here by the fire, and by the way, this stuff was like true. I was sitting by a fire and, so this isn't just making it up. With my tent behind me, my truck in front of me, with fishing rods in the bed, mountain bike attached to the rack, I am where I want to be. While my shadow dances, peace is my companion, and I am still. Joy is my friend. There are 2 squirrels in the tree just a few yards away. Perhaps they've come near to see if there's some food that's been carelessly dropped by an unaware camper. In the distance, I can hear a small waterfall on the river creek that runs near my campsite. It's staggering to me that folks, my wife, pay a lot of money for apps that will play the sounds of a river to help them sleep, but then they are unwilling to find a way to get to the mountains and spend time near waters. I largely mark my life by waters. There's a particular spot on a river in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, where I remember vividly sitting while I was in high school and thinking about what I hoped my life would look like. There's another spot by the Hiwassee River in Reliance, Tennessee, where I asked my wife to marry me. She thought that was way less cool than I did, for what it's worth, but she said yes. So, on a river in the DuPont State Forest outside Hendersonville, North Carolina, I once caught the biggest brown trout of my life, and yet it slipped out of my hands before my dad could get a picture. The same river is one that I often jump into in order to cool off after a long mountain bike ride in the summer heat. It's interesting to me that so many philosophers have used rivers and mountains in order to make significant points about the meaning and purpose of human existence. I think they were on to something. Now, I admit, my mind's jumping to tomorrow when I'll get my bike out on the trails in Pisgah National Forest, and then in the afternoon hit the Davidson River, depending on what the waters are like, maybe the North Mills, see if I can catch a few trout. But that anticipation is not the cause of my joy now. The campfire, the stars, the breeze, the taste of hot chocolate, the dancing shadows, they are in themselves enough. Here I am. Why should I waste time wanting to be somewhere else? Now, we all spend too much time in our lives trying to get somewhere else. We dream of the next vacation, the next promotion, the next relationship, the next car, the next iPhone, the next projector that works. We do this for an entirely sensible reason. The vast majority of our life is not what we wish it were. We struggle to be content with where we are because we are so concerned about where we are going. The problem with this way of living is that it causes us to be nearly entirely occupied with external accomplishments as the key to meaningful existence. In this book, I will refer to this way of living as a success-oriented approach. On this model, only if we achieve X, do Y, obtain Z, do we think that we will have enough, ever be enough. Yet, as David Foster Wallace so aptly explains, this approach to living well will inevitably leave us empty. We will never have, do, or be enough to satisfy the insatiable hunger for more, for the next thing, for what we lack. So let's listen to how David Foster Wallace expresses this idea of worship. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism, he says. There's no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, you'll never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Now, Wallace's point here is that the object of our worship defines us. What we worship is ultimately where we find real worth. It is what constitutes what we consider worthy. In the end, what we worship matters because it will name who we end up becoming. Such things matter because we don't have an infinite amount of time to decide what's worth worshiping. We are finite. In other words, we're going to die. And so therefore our decisions are weighty. Turns out finitude and finite, words I use a lot, not popular words. I didn't know this until I started talking about the book, and everybody's like, what's finitude mean? So it means we're going to die. How often, though, do we step back, slow down, silence our phones, and really ask ourselves, what then is worthy of my finitude? Only when we ask this question can we begin to take seriously that life is not best understood as a task of external accomplishments, getting jobs, getting married, getting a house, getting a car, getting a reputation, getting a retirement fund. Rather, life is better conceived as a task of becoming a self. Another way of asking what's worthy of your finitude is, who are you becoming? Now, footnote, as a reviewer recently said of my book, it was fantastic. He loved it, 5 stars. But I am so interested in going to the mountains and sloughing off the requirements of society that apparently I also have ignored the rules of grammar for who and whom. Now look, whom are you becoming sounds pretentious. So I didn't use whom. I realize I should have. But who are you becoming? You English majors, whom, if you will. These existential questions are not focused on success as the standard of meaning, but instead encourage us towards what I'm terming a faithfulness orientation. So instead of success, I'm suggesting faithfulness. According to this faithfulness orientation, joy is a lived task of self-making. The goal is not to have or to do in order that our lives be significant, but constantly to live toward what we think is worthy of our finitude, our time, our life itself. In this way, we avoid the temptation to be done with living before life is done with us. Or as Henry David Thoreau would say, I should strive to live so that I would not, when I come to die, discover I had not yet lived. Now, I am a philosopher. And so I try to think about these questions in terms of existential philosophy, in particular, the 19th century Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. He's someone to whom I frequently turn as I try to wrestle with my own existence, with what matters in existence, with why it matters that I exist. It is Kierkegaard who encourages us to take seriously the task of self, and it is Kierkegaard who I'm paraphrasing in my account of faithfulness. But I'm not only a philosopher. I'm also a fisherman, a mountain biker, an avid camper, a hiker. So when I read Kierkegaard and the other existential philosophers, I can't help but think that their frequent use of mountain metaphors, references to rivers, mentions of hiking, these are not simply coincidental, but essential aspects of their reflections on a life well lived. Now, it's easy to be philosophical while sitting here by the campfire, far from the din of towns and cities of which William Wordsworth warns. However, philosophy is not something to be done occasionally, but instead is meant to be a way of life that facilitates intentional reflection on how to live well. In our busy lives, we just tend to accept as given or obvious whatever value theory is operative in our broader social context. Whatever they say matters is what we just take for granted as mattering for us. It's as if we are all still in middle school, trying to be accepted by the cool kids. The history of philosophy, I suggest, effectively a long meditation on the emptiness of trying to be cool. For what it's worth, my parents are both elderly. My dad's in his 80s, mom's in her late 70s. And both for them and their friends, and also I used to do a lot of work with the Woodlands and had lots of friends over the Woodlands there at Furman, the retirement community. It seems to me that after retirement, social life looks more and more and more like middle school, for what it's worth. Who gets to sit at which table for bridge? Turns out is like fighting, words, like that is declaring war on someone's sacred cow. So the idea here that we tend to narrate our life as how do I be cool is something we all do all the way through our life, right? Who is the they that influences us to make sense of what we wish we were, right? I think philosophy says that's a bad idea. So rather than worrying about what the cool kids think, Socrates suggests that we should be only concerned about what virtuous people think. In other words, we should be careful not only to think well about what's worthy of our finitude, but also about to whom we turn as we try to figure that out. My wife and I, we got married, said in our wedding vows, which I wrote our wedding ceremony, and our wedding vows were, come, let's walk together and talk along the way. And the idea was because let's walk through rivers and over mountains and see where we end up, and hopefully the conversation's worthwhile, right? Now, I readily admit that existential philosophers are not the best examples of people with whom I really want to go camping. Kierkegaard was infamously melancholic, probably a pretty miserable person to be around. And in fact, a theologian friend of mine recently joked that he said, I can't imagine being alone in a tent with Kierkegaard and it going well. In many ways, Kierkegaard is the last person I want to take camping with me. However, his work and the work of other existential philosophers, I believe, is a profound resource for living well. I go camping because it allows me to prioritize such living. And so going camping with Kierkegaard is not literal, but a metaphorical encouragement to be purposive about how we live, who we are, and why it matters. I just threw another log on the fire, and in the process, I burnt my hand a bit. Finitude is marked not only by the task of meaning making, but also by essential embodied vulnerability. Our bodies age, they break, they eventually die. This is part of the deal. Being human is not something to try to overcome, but something to try to inhabit more fully. That's the hope of the book. I'm writing it not to teach you something, but as Walt Whitman might say, to invite my soul towards goodness, towards beauty, towards truth. I'm writing this book because I need to think through these things, not just once and for all, but again and again and again. Now, even being here by the campfire is a divergence from the vast majority of my life up to this point. Even though I love fishing, and in fact, I got my PhD in order to be a professor so I could fish in the summers, because my dad was a professor and he fished 4 days a year. And I was like, I'm in. I didn't understand that he already had tenure, right? And I have spent lots of time in the mountains. Despite that fact, I have spent far more time in pursuit of a career that would facilitate time in the mountains. 80-hour work weeks have been all too normal for me ever since I was in my mid-20s. I'm now 46, and I've been married for over 20 years. My wife, Vanessa, and I have a 13, he's now 14-year-old son, Atticus. Although I'm an advocate of hard work and celebrate excellence as a virtue worth cultivating, it brings me some regret to realize that most of what I've gotten for all those hours, all those years, is stress, anxiety, and time away from my family and the mountains that I love. And by the way, the picture, if you could see it, are all of my published books. So the point is like, look, I've done a bunch of stuff. Woohoo! Right? I was the president of the Soren Kierkegaard Society. Like, this is a big deal for like 6 people in the world. But it turns out that my family came at the cost, right? A story I tell later in the book, it's not here in the preface. Again, this is kind of the cliff notes of what the book does, but in the book, I tell a story about my son when he was like 3, probably. My parents were visiting in town. They now live in Travelers Rest. But at the time they were visiting from Chattanooga, and we drove past Furman. And they, were like, oh, look, there's Furman. And my son said, Grandma, look, there's Furman. That's where Daddy lives. And then you'd think, oh, well, surely I changed stuff, right? No. Then he was probably 7, 8, maybe, I guess. We were walking in downtown Travelers Rest, and I had his hand in mine. At the time, he was, like down here. Now he's 6 foot tall, and he stands next to me. But he was walking, I had his hand in mine, and he said, Dad, I don't want to be a philosopher when I grow up. And of course, I responded by saying, philosophers are the coolest. What are you talking about? And he's too young to be like pretentious or ironic or snotty like he is now nonstop at 14. And so I said, no, we're the coolest. And he said, no, Dad, philosophers just don't spend time with their kids. So when a 7-year-old tells you that, you'd think, right, that would change me. Oh, no. Back to our story. When the COVID pandemic hit in 2020, something broke in me. So it took an external thing to change what I call the inertia of the everyday, right? It turns out, even though I knew this was a problem, it was normal. And so I just normally. Finitude seemed all too real. Vulnerability seemed an unmanageable burden. Far too many of us, myself included, were wrecked by the isolation, the despair, the fear, the interruption of our success-oriented lives. I realized that the philosophy I had taught for 20 years was not something I was putting into practice in my own life. So I resolved to change things. As everyone was trying to get back to normal, I decided maybe normal was not something to long for in the first place. In the midst of a global chaos and unspeakable suffering, there emerged narratives of human greatness, staggering displays of charity, of empathy, self-sacrifice, and kindness that broke through our fear and selfishness. I was overwhelmed with the realization that since we do not have an infinite amount of time, it really matters what we do with the time that we have. What is worthy of my finitude was no longer an abstract question for the philosophy classroom. It transformed into the urgent question: what will I do with my finitude? And it became a matter of daily decision. So I went to the mountains. I took my to the mountains. One of the few benefits of virtual school, by the way. There are a few others. Like I held office hours on top of mountains all the time, by the way, and way better than going to the office. I bought a mountain bike, some new backpacking gear. I stopped viewing work as the thing that prevented me from camping. And instead, I decided to go camping with Kierkegaard and make going to the mountains a means of doing my work more effectively. I decided not simply to be a philosophy professor, but to strive to become a philosopher, which is actually another essay by Thoreau. He says there are nowadays professors of philosophy, but no philosophers. And so I said, well, what if I tried to become a philosopher? I realized that a success orientation might make me money, but cost me my existence. This was a price I was no longer willing to pay. I realize now that in many ways, it's due to my social privilege that I was so easily able to buy new gear, due to the flexibility of being a full professor who's tenured, that I was able to spend so much time on rivers and sleeping in tents. But awareness of this privilege makes me even more committed to the importance of working toward a world marked by social justice that facilitates such flexibility and agency for everyone. One of the biggest critiques of this book that I've gotten is, this all sounds fantastic, but you're a upper middle class white guy who's fully tenured and on and on. And I think that's the right critique. I think it's unfair because the point is that's right, but only if we can envision what it is we're striving for in our social critique are we critical towards something. And so this book is an attempt to lay out what we might be critical toward, right? The brokenness that COVID made visible to me also illustrated the brokenness of our society, the despair that's felt by so many, especially within historically marginalized communities. Existential philosophy, for all its flaws, is right about the radical contingency of existence. Normal is neither obvious nor necessary. Things can and should be different. I'm convinced that such change starts in small ways in our daily lives. And so it is for that reason that I see this book as an invitation to us all to think carefully about how we spend these lives, how we orient our projects, how we form our beliefs, and how we understand meaning. As I try to make clear in the book, going camping, fishing, biking, hiking, these are my preferred ways to facilitate this sort of intentional existential reflection. They are the activities that bring me joy, that allow finitude not to be something I desire to escape, but something I hope to inhabit more effectively. They call to me, and I try to do my best to respond. But these specifics may not be your preferred activities. My wife would always rather be at the beach in a Airbnb or resort. She thinks sleeping on the ground is absolutely something humans should have gotten over when we, found fire, right? The point then is not that you go camping with Kierkegaard, but that you become existentially aware, that you live on purpose, that you strive toward faithfulness, however you understand that to make sense in your situation. Now, I hope that you will join me by the campfire, like the large crow that's now walking toward me and the squirrels who continue to play on the trees. We don't have to talk about philosophy the whole time, but maybe we can live philosophically together on the trails, in our offices, and at our homes. So the thought is, right, this is meant to be this invitation. So I conclude the preface, come on over, I have an extra cup. I'll heat up some more water for hot chocolate. The marshmallows are on the table over there. Grab one, I'll get you a stick for roasting. The air is chilly, but there's warmth by the fire. The shadows model for us not simply how to walk heavily through our lives, but how to dance together on the trails. And so then the book unfolds where I work through all those ideas with, a chapter about what it means to be known, a chapter about what faithfulness really looks like. I define it as risk with direction. I've got a chapter that is all about the difference between empirical aloneness in the mountains and ethical aloneness, which I say is actually radically impossible for relational beings like us. And when we think we can be ethically alone, we are deceiving ourselves. I set up as the foil, the enemy of the piece, the villain, the success-driven person. I borrow from a philosopher friend of mine and his definition of the asshole. And so I have the unfolding of why assholes are the problem in our world, and we have to overcome this by cultivating trail ethics, humility, hospitality, and gratitude. And then I land the plane at the end by thinking about how aging and death are actually the context in which life matters. So the book unfolds, and then I bring it to a close with the postscript. It's been a great day. On the trails, I'm now back at camp. The fire is in that early stage when the flames are flickering and yet might still fizzle out and require rekindling. The bikes are dirty. They show the signs of having navigated some of the best miles of Nar in Pisgah National Forest. I'm riding there tomorrow, but it's going to be very cold. A little concerned. Thankfully, my body is without any serious injury, just a few bruises on my shins from where the screws on the pedals got me. There are a bunch of good feelings in life, but one of the very best is the exhaustion that comes after a long day of exertion in the course of doing what you love. Today, two friends and I rode Avery Creek, a Pisgah Black Diamond rated biking trail. This was my first time down that particular trail. I've since done it, dozens of times. But this trail definitely warrants its Black Diamond rating. It has sizable drops, steep rock gardens, big gap jumps, and a lot of flow. It reminds you that risk is real in mountain biking as in life. Now, the thing that really hits me, though, as I unpack some gear from my truck, is that the downhill run was only possible because of the extremely long climb to get to the top of the trailhead. Any of you who do hike up near Brevard know these references. You have to go all the way up Clawhammer Road, which is not really a road. That sounds way too easy. Imagine just sort of like a washed out gravel and dirt thing that kind of just goes vertically for about 6.5 miles. And then when you get to the top, you do upper black, which is where the road, which is rideable but steep, becomes unrideable. And so you have to hike a bike. And so you put your bike on your shoulder and you hike the bike up. Now, after miles and miles of climbing, so it takes about 2 hours, it's almost 9 miles that you climb the whole way up to the top. Climbing the bike up these steep trails, more miles of carrying your bike up the steeper trails, only then do you get to tighten your helmet, put on your elbow pads, zip up your body armor, and drop in so you can send it on the downhill. Although the risk greatly increases going down, it's only by willfully, intentionally, purposively directing yourself uphill for a very long time that you earn the downhill. It's not the downhill run, though, that justifies the good exhaustion back at the campsite. It doesn't actually wear you out. It's the climb that preceded it. The same is true for nearly all other outdoor activities. Nothing tastes better than hot chocolate around a campfire after a 15-mile day of backpacking. It's as if your body wants to enact the yes saying that Friedrich Nietzsche claims is the condition of life. Yes, yes, so much yes. The climb, the miles, the hike, they're all part of what makes the day that it is. It is the exertion then that now warrants the laughter with friends by the fire, the taste of food eaten with long spoons, and the heavy rest that comes when in a sleeping bag with stars above. While riding a different trail recently, I'll just tell the story. A buddy of mine named Seth, who, if any of you know Village Anglican Church here in Greenville, he's the pastor there. But Seth and I are very, very close friends, and we were riding a trail together. And this trail is weird because it had been raining. It wasn't super, super rough or rugged, but there's this little spot where there's like a bridge, in scare quotes, about yay wide. And it goes, I don't know, probably 5 feet across this place where a waterfall kind of goes underneath you. It's not, some big, enormous thing, right? But the water's been doing it for a long time. And so, I don't know, 25, 30 feet down to where the water kind of then runs out from underneath. So we're riding, Seth's in front of me. And as he gets to that little wooden bridge that goes across this ravine, he's going the wrong direction. So in order to get his tire to kind of move correctly, he flips a pedal. But when he flips his pedal, it spins the back tire and makes it slip, and he goes over the edge. Now, I was riding behind Seth, and all I heard was him yell in panic. And then he was simply gone. Now, look, Seth's well over 6 feet tall, and when his bike slid off the side, he disappeared with it. I mean, it was weird. He was like, whoa, just gone. Silence. I went racing up to the spot, jumped off my bike, ran to where he had gone over, and there on the ground, with his bike a couple feet from him, was Seth. He had missed the rocks, which were scattered all around. He had missed the downed trees from storms long past. He had landed in mud. He was fine. He was also lucky. Things could have gone badly, but they didn't. There in the mud, Seth took a deep breath and felt the contingency of his own existence. And yet he and I both appreciated the beauty of that contingency, right? It's the fact that we had sort of had that moment that life somehow popped in its glory in that very instant. We didn't have to be there. You don't have to be where you are. None of us have to be here. Philosophers have long expressed the wonder that comes with this awareness of the beauty of the contingency of existence by asking, why is there something rather than nothing? Now, there's lots of answers that various philosophers have given to the question, but for me, sitting here by the fire, thinking about that close call and about the fact that Seth and I were back on the trails just a few days later, hitting even bigger features, pushing each other to find joy in the fragile moments of finite existence. I am less concerned with the answer to why is there something, and more impressed by the fact that we, you, me, all of us, are part of the something that is. Now, I'm going to play this for them just because it is pretty fantastic. It's a video of Seth recently going off a bigger thing and entirely flipping his bike and crashing, and then lifting his hand saying, I guess I'm good. So we'll pick up from there. Good exhaustion is not only occasioned by the steep climbs, but it's also conditioned by the fact that we could have been doing something else, right? All of us tonight we're here, but we could have been elsewhere, right? We could have been sitting on the couch. We could have been in the hospital with a loved one. We could have been stuck at the office. We could have been rained, unable to get to the trails, but here we are. Tired, yes, but in all the right ways. Tired because we are not invulnerable. Notice if we were invulnerable, if we were infinite, we would never be tired. So it actually would not make anything interesting because the risk would always be gone. We are tired because we simply are. Now, my son Atticus loves campfires. He loves them so much that they're often the source of great frustration when we camp together because I'm always scared he's going to burn down the forest. All he wants to do is take the stick, put it in the fire, let it get black, and then blow it. You know, it gets hot and black, and he blows it out and then writes on the rocks nearby because it becomes like this big long stick pencil. Right? Well, the tricky thing, though, about Atticus's love of campfires is that he lacks the experience with them that provides the practical wisdom about how to navigate them responsibly. Fires have a way of refusing to go out easily. They deceive even the wisest among us. My dad, who has spent a great deal of time in the outdoors since he was a child, recently had a fire in his backyard fire pit. It was a lovely evening of hot dogs, s'mores with family. And as the night came to an end, he poured water over it and went to bed. Next day, he went out to clear out the ash and the remains from the fire the night before. So he took a shovel, scooped up what he assumed were now all these cold, charred pieces of wood, threw them into the woods behind his house, cleaned up the last few remnants of the grandkids' inability to keep all the graham crackers in their mouths, and he went inside. About 15 minutes later, he happened to glance out the window and to his horror, saw the ground where he had thrown the remains of the previous evening's fire was ablaze. The embers down deep in the fire pit had somehow avoided the water he poured over them the night before. They remained hot. They remained ready to reignite. Simply put, despite his best efforts to eliminate them, they remained. Now, embers are like that. They stay warm long after flames go out. Thankfully, my dad was able to grab a hose and he doused the new fire in the backyard. But fire safety notwithstanding, I think there's an important lesson that we can learn from the embers that remain. This is a lesson that I think can speak to us as we close out our time in the mountains together. The idea is that our lives should be more like embers than fires, more like mountains than cities. Fires come and go, but embers remain hot long after the fire is gone. Cities come and go, and so does the cultural relevance of this or that particular important thing celebrated by influencers within the cities. But the mountains that we see in the distance remain stable, even as our fashions, our priorities, and our life stages change. I'm now 46, but I can still go to the same spot that my dad and I fished together when I was 20. And I talk about in the book, it actually is complicated to me now because he has neuropathy in his legs, and so he can't, right? And so I go back to these places without him. And when he goes fishing with me, which is still his favorite thing to do in the world, we can only fish places that he can get to without having to hike in, which makes the fishable waters very, very limited. Right? It remains there, this river, as a witness to the fungibility of my own interests. The river doesn't care if I fish it or not, but I will care if I don't teach my son to fish. I'm now a full professor of philosophy, which again, it's a really big deal for like 10 of us, right? The rest of the world, do not care. But I can still go to the same trail that I hiked when I was a grad student, wondering if I'd ever find a job. The mountain doesn't care if I return, but I love that my life can be marked by miles on the trail as much as it can by career accomplishments and books on the shelf. My wife and I have been married for over 20 years. Yet the place where we went camping together on our first date, whole chapter about our first date, by the way. That's a fun one. She hates camping. The place we went still remains. The trees have grown. The generations of animals have come and gone there in the forest. The forest doesn't care if we go camping. But my wife and I definitely find peace in the fact that in the face of so much that is lost as we age, the place is there as testament to our investment in each other. Embers, like mountains, remain, and they call out to us for response. Now, the first rule of being in the mountains is to leave no trace. But when it comes to human existence, the opposite is true. Yes, we're vulnerable, but we are also relational. For what it's worth, those are the twin pillars of human condition that I try to articulate in the book. These are the two facts of the human condition that I think motivate the need for faithfulness, risk with direction as a way of life. What will remain of what you willed to be true, to be meaningful, to be beautiful in the world? There are two ways to think about these traces that we can leave of our finitude. We can make a mark or leave a legacy. Now, making a mark is fine, but it is also fleeting because it operates according to the logic of success. It's what happens when you donate money to get your name on the plaque outside a building, or endow a scholarship that carries your name, or do something that causes a statue of you to be built in the local park. These are all good things, and many of us have benefited from the marks made by others. Leaving a legacy, in contrast, though, appeals to the logic of faithfulness. It's not about your name being remembered, but about others being able to live into their names in light of the virtue, the excellence, and the example that you made plausible as a way of life worthy of undertaking. Marks are like fires. They burn brightly. Plaques shine in the sun. Fires crackle and pop and make their presence known. Praise from others is easy to see, and the applause from the crowd is easy to hear. Fires are a record of our activities in real time. Marks are things that we get to see as part of our experience. Legacies, alternatively, are like embers in mountains. Mountains can often disappear in the background and be forgotten in light of the new housing development, the outdoor shops, the new cars and phones that occupy our attention. Embers can be forgotten as we pack up the truck, thinking that what really mattered is now finished. Similarly, legacies are not things that are shiny and popular. They are the record of long persistence. They are mementos to the importance of meaning making, not just cheering what the crowd thinks matters. Marks can disappear once the plaque gets changed. The statue breaks, the scholarship expires. Legacies remain, even if their origins are forgotten. I care far less that my son wants to be like me than I do that he wants to be kind, charitable, and courageous. Those virtues are what matter. Accordingly, I try to live a life that leaves a legacy such that those virtues are normative for him. They are habits that he lives into rather than objects he desires. A life of faithfulness leaves a legacy worthy of our finitude. Rather than encouraging others to be like us, faithful legacies foster space for others to be faithful to what they think matters. It's not about getting others to remember us, but to remember why it matters to live on purpose. It's not about being celebrated as having won the game of life, but about appreciating every day what the philosopher Nick Riggle terms this beauty. This beauty of existence, this beauty that we are here, this beauty of good exhaustion, this beauty of those who walked the trails before us and now form the cloud of witnesses encouraging us to keep moving forward. This fire is beautiful. The embers that remain hot tomorrow will remind us that tomorrow is beautiful too, even if the fire is gone. Life is poorly understood according to a success logic of achievement, but shines forth in its contingent singularity when we enact a faithfulness logic of ever striving toward who we hope to become. Now, I am stoked that my buddies and I made it safely down Avery Creek, but the accomplishment that matters is not that we rode that trail, but that we prioritize riding bikes as part of our lives. I want to catch the trophy trout, but what matters most is not that I have a fish on the wall, but that I keep fishing. There's a chapter in the book called Of God and Trout Fishing, which is all about hope and how hope shows up when fishing in various ways. Embers like mountains remain. As vulnerable and relational beings trying to figure out what's worthy of our finitude, that stability should humble us and inspire us toward a deeper gratitude. Thank you all for joining me on the trail, for hiking with me a few miles more, for casting out your line into waters in which we both stand, for dropping in at the top and fist bumping me at the bottom, and for coming camping with me and Kierkegaard. Our time together has been so very worthy of my finitude, and I hope it was worthy of yours as well. Thank you all so much. I do apologize. The slides make it way more compelling, but that's all right. So if you have any thoughts or questions, I'm happy to speak to any of that. And we'll call tonight. I have books available, some stickers and things. If you'd like to pick one up, happy to sign it for you. But anybody online too, if you have questions, I will pull the chat up. So any questions that you guys have, I'm happy to try to respond. So, yeah. That ear scratch was a question. I see that. That's the I'm being humble while I try to get the question.
When you started you say, now you're 45, when you say now you're 46.
Right.
So it's 1 year.
No, that was just a typo.
If you left it intentional or just.
Yeah, no, that was the typo. So is the fact that it brings me probably greater shame than abandoning my family for so many years. At the end of the book in the postscript, it has the line just like, these are rivers that we must hear or something, and I spelled it H-E-R-E instead of H-E-A-R. So look, 5 rounds of copy. Mistakes remain. Which I actually find now, my wife tells me, no, use this as an example. It shows the fact that vulnerability continues, that it's not about being perfect, and maybe that's right. I'm embarrassed by it. But.
I think teasing you out, but my real question is, so I want to make, first of all, I think the book which you're kind of describing here through the camping and those experiences is great. Because at the end, especially as you said, after college, we all feel independent use. So because we are so busy with many things that having we all the time to really look at. But now once you kind of have this cocoon and that you can actually see why is that the reason behind. Now you want to really be a perspective to make the life is more meaningful and joyful, intent in different ways. So like when you put over here about the fates, you say risk with directions. That were your kind of in one way you describe the fate, right? That's right. So why do you think that the fate is a risk? Because in many other, I would say maybe we argue the opposite to say fate is more a security with discipline. So now you are telling, it's risk with direction.
Right.
How about to compare maybe the argument of faith is a security with discipline.
Yeah.
What's your,
Yeah. So the question people online are asking me to repeat. The question is, it seems like that now that we've quote unquote returned to normal or gone back to our daily lives, our routines, the inertia of the everyday has retaken hold, that it can be hard to do the kinds of things that I'm recommending. And so Akif is saying, maybe we need to think of faith not as risk with direction, but as a kind of security that maintains us in the midst of those difficult realities that we have to navigate. And so why do I think of faith as this risky thing instead of a kind of security, a anchor, if you will, right? And in fact, in my Christian tradition, we used to sing a song called The Anchor Holds, which is all about faith, right? That no matter what seas start going crazy and how bad the storm gets, the anchor holds, which is this claim of faith as a kind of anchor. So two thoughts. One, I actually think one of the things that writing this book has made me palpably think through, and I have not stopped thinking through it since I wrote it, is right now, the last 6-7 months, I have fished and biked and hiked and camped less than I did pretty much any single month before that for the last 3 or 4 years. And there's only one reason. It's because I wrote a stupid book and I've been out giving talks and on podcasts and recording audio and doing book tours. So the irony is, like, even doing the stuff to help people do the things that we want to do becomes the very obstacle to doing those things. So as I tell people, like, I'm not biking very much. I wrote a book about why we should go biking all the time. So I think that irony is something we all have to make sense of, which is the goal is not to somehow not inhabit the lives we live, but to find, like if you think about a plane, like a trim tab on a plane can move that whole thing, or a rudder on a ship. The ship can be, a mile wide. Rudder might be just a few feet and it can move the whole thing. So where are those trim tabs in our life that allow us to be able to just move slightly in directions that are more compelling, right? And as a really good friend of mine, Wendy Farley, she's a queer feminist theologian who I absolutely love, and an avid hiker. She suggests in an amazing book called Beguiled by Beauty that sometimes what it looks like to do the stuff that I'm describing is not going to the mountains, taking a day off work, being all super intentional. It's just the fact that, like, when your favorite song comes on the way to work, you're 20 seconds late because you let it finish. She says, that's a game changer, right? The fact that we are not denied joy because of our life, but our life is the space where joy is possible, right? So I say that in the first point just to say, believe me, as we return to normal, there are lots of moments where I feel very guilty about wishing we were still in lockdown, because I loved what my life looked like during it. Problem is, wouldn't be with you fine folk, right? So we lose other things. And that's the reason I don't talk about faith as security. Because when it comes to thinking about faith as an existential idea rather than a religious one, it's always a reminder, whatever I choose, however I spend my time, whatever I'm invested in, I'm choosing not to do other things. And it might always be the case that I should have, right? No matter what you decide to do. Jacques Derrida, this postmodern philosopher, talks about the fact that when he feeds his cat every morning, he is overcome by guilt. You might say, come on, what in the world? That's like the best thing you can do. You're feeding your cat, though I think all cats are evil. But he liked cats. And he said, when I feed my cat, I am complicit in the starvation of every cat who doesn't have food this morning. Now, that's an extreme way of saying we had an amazing dinner. People died around the world from starvation while we ate it. Now, that doesn't mean we don't enjoy our dinner, but it does mean we never get over the risk that my choice could have been to do something else. And maybe I should have made that choice. Now, this can derail us, right? Sounds exhausting, doesn't it? Oh my goodness, I'll never be able, I'm always second guessing. I'm always different. That's not what the existentialists do. They say, when you grasp this contingency, when you get how frustrating finitude really is, you also recognize that it is, and this is a quote from one of my professors who died from cancer at 52. I talked about him in the last chapter. When he was diagnosed with cancer, the day he got diagnosed, stage 4, they gave him 6 months to live, had 2 small kids. He emailed me. And he said, hey, I've got stage 4 cancer. I'm going to let the mechanics do with me what they will. But I was never abused to think that the human condition was a disease from which I should seek a cure. And then he goes on to say, in the end, there is the unmanageable, but we would be trivial beings without it. And that idea that the existence we live as risky is what makes every decision matter that much more, I'm in. Now, direction still matters. So you might say, look, a particular kind of religious faith commitment is an anchor that gets me through this difficult, risky finitude. Sure, that's just the way then that you have chosen to direct your finitude. Awesome. Again, I'm trying to become a Christian best I can. I'm fine with that religious direction. But think about how many religious people decide that their faith excuses not having to be concerned about the fact that other people exist. It justifies not just an anchor, but protecting them from relationships, right? So I'm worried about anything that minimizes the contingency, but I am fine to celebrate religious existence as a direction well worth our finitude for some people. And then it is for me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I do in the book. I didn't in this, but I do in the book. Yeah. So Martin Luther King talks about risk in the sense where he says faith is not, you know, being able to see the whole staircase. It's taking the step without being able to see it, right? Martin Luther King also quotes Mother Teresa, who's the one who says we are called to faithfulness, not success. And in the book, I try to draw, and also in some other work I've been doing recently, I try to draw on religious thinkers like Martin Luther King, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Simone Weil, Soren Kierkegaard. These are all religious thinkers. And I draw on them to describe what I call militant liturgies, where the idea is instead of thinking about liturgy, like religious practice, as the kind of thing that becomes stagnant and stable such that we are part of the community because we do this, but they don't, and therefore they're out, right? It becomes an exclusive move. Religious liturgies become militant against the very triumphalism of any established religion that would think exclusion's the goal. And so I tap into the very religious thinkers advocating something like Christian faith as resources for being critical of the assholery on display in so many of the churches that claim the name Christian as well. Yeah. So risk for me is existential. And by the way, footnote, theologically, I would just say this is the point, at least in the biblical scriptures, where it says, you know, we now see through a glass darkly, right? That's just mystery. That means the risk continues. Soren Kierkegaard puts it this way. He says that we understand life backwards, right? Now I can look back and say, oh my gosh, I worked too much. Shouldn't spend so much time at the office. Missed my son. Now he's 14, doesn't want to be with me. We're working on it. I bought him a fancy bike at Christmas. We'll see if he rides it. But the fact that I can look backwards and understand, I always live forward with risk continuing, which is fascinating. The ancient Hebrews had this awesome theory of time as embodied. And if I were to ask you, like any commencement address you've ever heard, they say, you know, where's the future? It's in front of you, right? The future's in front of you. The path's in front of you. Woo! Play, pomp, and circumstance, have a degree. The ancient Hebrews said that gets it entirely wrong. Where is the future? They say behind us, because it's what I can't see. So I have to walk backwards into the future, the ancient Hebrews say, and that means I've got to walk really carefully because the risk continues. Yeah. Please.
Looking backward, you're 46. When you were 36, did you have the same perspective on that? What are the other things?
Yeah, so I think I think we have to do some work to differentiate a couple things that I don't do a very good job of here. I think the book maybe does a better job. So I'm not opposed. I'm going to make a qualifier, and then the answer is yes and no, which is of course a frustrating philosophy answer, right?
Repeat his question.
Oh, sorry. The question for Bill is, at 46, do I think there's different things worthy of my finitude than when I was 26, say, right? Does this change across our lives? And the qualifier is this: I don't think success is bad. By success in that sense, I mean that you actually accomplish the things that you hope to be true in your life. I hope that works out for all of you. I hope you are successful at getting home tonight, right? I mean, this is easy, low-hanging fruit, hopefully, right? I tell my students every single day, I'll see you next time, unless a piano falls on our heads. And this is actually a story from Kierkegaard about a guy who is at his friend's house. He says, all right, Joe, I'll see you tomorrow. And he walks out and a roofing tile falls off and kills him. And Kierkegaard's like, don't be so sure you got tomorrow. There ain't no next year, right? So how can we rethink success as a good, but not let it be a value theory by which we determine our meaning, right? That you're successful does not make you better than the person next to you who things didn't work out as well. That you ended up with a physical condition that makes fishing impossible doesn't mean your life was somehow less important. That poverty defined part of your embodied existence, usually for all kinds of historical reasons linked to the decisions made by the powerful, does not mean that you somehow are less significant or less meaningful as a person. However, if we think instead of success as logistics, I'm in, right? You want to be a professor so you can fish in the summers? Sounds like good stuff. Now you got to go to school for a while, right? You want to get home tonight and you don't live like 2 feet away? Well, do you have a car? Like these are things, do you have a horse strung out outside? Like thinking through success as logistics. Then if it works, awesome. There's joy in the fact that we've done some stuff we hoped would be the case. But we're not defined by our success, and therefore we're not wrecked by our failures, right? They are just parts of the story. That's the qualifier to say, no, my direction is not the same when I was 26, because at 26, I was logistically minded in way more intentional ways than I am now. Right now, my logistics are stuff like, man, hope the trails aren't that cold tomorrow. Like that's as far as I hope my son does well at his tryouts this Saturday for band, plays percussion. Hope my wife has a good night's sleep. Doesn't have it. So when I was 26, I had all these. I want to get that PhD. I want to eventually have a family. I want to get a tenure track job. I want to make sure that I publish a book. Like all those logistics were more foregrounded because we have life stages that require more or less logistical focus. Now, does that mean I don't have logistics now? No, it just means that they're a little bit different. Yes, the orientation of my faithfulness, my direction was the same in that stuff that really matters shouldn't change over time. How we cash it out logistically does. I hope at 26, I wanted to become somebody who loved truth, beauty, and goodness. I hope at 26, I was somebody who strove for virtue. I hope at 26, I treated people with kindness, right? These things are still just as true for me today. The way I would suggest people think about this is this morning I was at a business meeting, business leaders, so I went today to kind of get a sense of the audience so I can hit them correctly in March when I keynote. And it was fascinating because that crowd, boy, they are goal-oriented, right? And they need to be. The logistics of their life require it. But it was fascinating because the kinds of goals that they think about are all goals that can be checked off on a temporal list. Make $1 million, exit, retire at 52, hire 500 employees, pick a thing, right? Every one of them are in principle achievable. Think about the stuff that, in my opinion, really matters. So it's not that that doesn't, it's just it doesn't matter as definitive. I want to become a good father. Well, I had an awesome fathering day yesterday. It was amazing. My 14-year-old even went to bed saying, Dad, I love you. This was the best day ever. So you will be happy to know, so that the box checking can occur in the right sorts of success ways, I left my family last night afterwards. I'm now single and free and have no kid because I went out on top. Does that make any sense? No, that's the worst father, right? Because it wasn't about checking the box. It was about being invested in that continued relationship. No matter wins and losses and bad days and good days, I'm in. My wife and I had an amazing anniversary dinner. And I divorced her right after so it wouldn't go downhill. You made partner at the law firm, which was the goal of your existence. I hope you get hit by a bus or a P because you don't know how to live the next day. So many of my students, their entire existence is defined by checking a box of a career. And I keep telling them, look, that's logistical important. Let's do it. Let's get you there. The problem is when the pandemic hit and their grad school offers got suspended or their internships got canceled, I had them calling me nearly suicidal because they didn't know how to exist outside the box checking careerism that they had been trained to love. That's the thing that I want to oppose. So should the stuff that we're faithful to really change? Not really. But boy, it's going to look very different because I didn't have a kid at 26, right? So I wasn't becoming a good father, but I sure wanted that to be something that would define me in long-term ways, right? And even if we didn't have any kids, my best friend right now, try to have kids, they're not, able to have them. That doesn't make him a failure. But when I talk with him, boy, that's the way he narrates his struggles, because that's the way we've made everything in life matter. Can you check the box? Can you put it on the shelf? Can you compare it? Do you have more? And I want to say, man, I want to keep fishing. I tell my 20-year-olds when I ride with them, they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff on the bikes. I'm like, guys, like, y'all hit it. My goal is to keep riding at 60, which means I'm going to have to ride different at 46 than at 26. Let's see. Question online. Copy of the book. It's available on Amazon. You can also, if you hate Amazon, buy it at bookshop.org. If you happen to be near Greenville, there are signed copies at M. Judson. Yes, thank you guys so much online. Final question, we'll call it tonight. Let's go over here. You and I can talk a bunch.
I understood it, kind of a before and after personal experience.
Yep.
And the catalyst for that was the pandemic. What are things that people can do apart from having to open themselves to this awakening experience?
Yeah.
There are many philosophers and theologians that talk about the stages,
Right.
the stages of life. And sometimes it's 2, and sometimes it's 4, and sometimes it's 5 or 7.
Yeah.
How do you open yourself? And I think most people never do.
Yeah.
But what are some practices or
Yeah.
things to do, like your son, what is it that could happen to him apart from a pandemic? So that someone who really wants to experience this awakening, this enlightenment, this moving into the higher consciousness, what do you do?
Great question for everybody online. Question is, so what practically can we do to facilitate this kind of movement into faithfulness as a way of life, rather than thinking we need pandemics to break our world in order to make the change possible? I think it's a great question and a good place to kind of bring our official evening to a close. Again, I'm going to hang out. If you want to come chat personally, I'm happy to, and I'll have books to sign and stuff. So here's 2 thoughts. First is, Kierkegaard's interesting when it comes to like the stages of life and how we go through them. He says that there are 3 stages in life: the aesthetic, where everything's immediate. This is the success culture, right? You want a new car, you get a new car, but then you don't really like it. You want another new car. Like the fact that we have phone plans that brag about allowing you to get a new one every year is a staggering, astonishing facet of contemporary human existence. No phone is not entirely effective after a year. It's great. It's just you want a new one because it's new, right? And so he says aesthetic existence is, he identifies it with the seducer, who always wants a new relationship, a new beloved, because as soon as the beloved says, oh, I love you too, he's like, ah, crap, I'm out. Just like leaving your wife because you had a great anniversary, now it's time to get divorced. That's the aesthetic, because it's not about the relationship, it's about the desire for, right? The second stage, he says, is the ethical, which is where universal ideas become our anchor. So the account of faith that you're articulating, Keith, I would actually say is a kind of ethical model rather than a religious model for Kierkegaard. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong, just a different model. And this ethical stage he defines as, or describes as, marriage, right? It's not just the seduction and new people every night, swipe left. It's now, how do I stay with this person so identity takes on a social role? I become the husband. The problem with the aesthetic is that we despair because we can never actually be ourselves, right? Because we're always trying to find ourselves in some external object. If I can just get that job, if I can just get that promotion. In the book, I call this, if only, then I'll. If only I can get to the end of the semester, then I'll take a break. And if only I can retire, then I'll have time to fish. My dad's best friend, his entire life loved fishing, never got to fish very much. He was a physician. And so finally retired. He and his wife were moving to Colorado to be near their only child and their grandkids. And he was so excited he was going to go fishing. And literally, the month he retired, he was also diagnosed with cancer and was dead within a few more months. Like, man, should have retired earlier, right? Or just sort of fished more while working. Like, again, there's lots of options. Maybe just relocate to Denver so you can leave with your, like, who knows? But you can't live with the regret as agonizing. You live with regret as a reminder that contingency is real, right? So the ethical is despairing because we get to be ourself, but our self is now not actualized in risk, but in role. You are the boss, the CEO, the professor, the husband, etc. Then he says we can go into the religious, and the religious is the space, he says, where we radically take ourselves up in passion as oriented toward that which is always going to remain mysterious. So if we fully invest ourselves in God, we'll never have God all figured out, which means we'll never achieve it. But it's also something that isn't an external accomplishment. And so therefore, it always pulls us ever deeper in. So he says we can only become religious. We can never be religious. Now, here's the cool thing. You might think, as we do in success cultures, well, you start aesthetic, you achieve, and then you land in religious. Woohoo! Not for Kierkegaard. These are all three options for every instant. We are always going back and forth and navigating these because it turns out they're paradigms by which to make sense of ourselves. So the question is, how do we invite the paradigm shift to what he calls the religious, or what I'm calling faithfulness, which is not a religious idea for me, but it can be for a lot of people. I think the practices in which we can engage are threefold. And these are not going to be specific things like go to the mountains. That's not the recommendation. They are A, be humble enough with yourself to admit that you've got work to do. I think that's actually a practice. Humility is a task, right? But think about it, assholes, not humble. And so what have we narrated as the goal? All my students want to be those successful people. They want to become assholes. And when I point this out to them, like, that's ridiculous. Stop being a hater. I was like, notice how success in this way now becomes normative, such that who do we invite for graduation speeches? The successful people who have achieved it all. And they show up and do what? Maybe in great speeches, invite us, usually, there are some awesome exceptions, usually they invite us to recognize that you too can be where I am. In other words, if you work enough and get rich enough, you'll have enough distractions to avoid the fact that you're miserable. And if I can convince you to want to be me, I don't have to pay attention to my misery because everybody wants to be me. I must be doing okay. Why don't we invite the person, who's working at the coffee shop and says, yeah, I don't have enough money, still paying school loans, but you know what? I'm okay. I'm good. Because that person doesn't donate wings to buildings. right? So our very structure of how we narrate humility is it's a casualty that has to be lost in the process of becoming successful. So A, cultivate humility. B, I would say find ways to be interrupted by others constructively. So this is, you can read this however you want, my critique of Christian nationalism, my critique of division, whatever, my critique of totalitarianism, absolutism, authoritarianism. We live in a society where we think the way that I stand for virtue is by standing against those people. But notice what this does. That reinforces the arrogance of my group. Instead of saying, if I'm cultivating humility as a practice, I'm actively seeking out being hospitable to voices that I don't really agree with, and maybe I don't understand. I might think they're wrong. So notice, this doesn't mean I agree with them. But can I do work to make sense of why they stand elsewhere? Because notice, faithfulness is not about going to the mountains. It's about being purposive about where we stand, recognizing there's other options available. Humility, hospitality. And then finally, find ways to cultivate gratitude. And in my son's life, we're trying to do this by simply pointing out to him the fact that thank you is like an afterthought, always. But in one of the chapters, I talk about being Southern and loving the fact that please and thank you just became part of my daily liturgies, right? Even if I didn't mean it, it was part of what I said. And then you start realizing, but if you say it, you also kind of embody this. So what would it look like if you did be 20 seconds late to work, but now you're walking in grateful that that song got to finish? What if you tonight leave and say, man, too bad the dumb video didn't work, but we're grateful that, hey, we got to talk a little bit more, right? Tomorrow's gonna be really cool, but I'm grateful I'm not right about myself. So if we can cultivate these virtues as practices and remember that the goal is not to become faithful, but every day to navigate the logistics of embodied existence and the task of self-making as a lifetime task. Last thing I'll say, the great surprises to me, and I will not assume any ages in this room, but I've given lots of talks over the last 6-7 months since the book came out, and hands down, the group of people who have responded the best to my utter shock and awe have been folks that I'm assuming are elderly. I don't know. I don't want to assume bodily facts about them. However, folks come up to me, and I've had one guy stands out to me, in his late 70s, and he said, you don't understand. He said, he had the tears in his eyes. He said, every day I get out of bed since I retired, I've wondered why I even exist. What's the point? Until I heard this talk, he said, I want a copy for all of my grandkids. Because he said, you've reminded me faithfulness is not something retired people don't get to keep trying to do. But man, that's, which isn't me, right? All I'm doing is helping him understand the big ideas that philosophy's always been saying. But that notion wrecks me. I freaking love that. There's also a group of Boy Scouts reading the book in Illinois somewhere. So I love the idea that there are 15-year-olds wrestling with these ideas, and there's 80-year-olds wrestling with these ideas. And a guy emailed me the other day, I don't know these people, but emailed me from San Diego, maybe? He's in California. And he said, hey, Aaron, you don't know me. I'm also 46. I have 2 sons. Just wanted to let you know I finished your book this week. I'm taking them camping this weekend. Thanks. I don't know anything else about the guy. The idea that he reached out to say, like, makes me think maybe that was the occasion, right? It invited him to say, hey, maybe I don't have to get that done this weekend. I can go hang out with my sons. And then my hunch is his gratitude's going to be a little bit easier to achieve after that. Yeah. Oh, that's a good answer. That's one I got. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to hang out, talk to anybody online. Thank you so much. For anybody online, please do go to my Substack, Philosophy in the Wild. It's just jaaaronsimmons.substack.com. You can also find me at jaaaronsimmons.com and links to everything else, but I would love to connect with you on Substack as well. I do weekly writings there and all kinds of fun stuff. So thank you guys so much. If I can ever do anything for you, please reach out. My email is also available on my website. So thank you guys so much. Thank you all. If you do want to book, I'm able to take cards or Apple Pay or cash. Or whatever.
Thank you.
If you don't want
Cool.
to, that's entirely cool too.
Over to
The decision is real.
Thank you for joining us.